one other councillor coming, Councillor Monroe, but we're going to get started. First of all, could I say before we go into the regulatory side that I'm convening the meeting this morning. Unfortunately, the convener, Councillor Alexander, is still in recovery, and I'm sure that the committee will wish him all the best in his recovery. I can also say at this stage that we have two new members of the committee, although both of them have been on this planning committee before, and it's Councillor Monroe, who we're still waiting on, and Councillor Grant, and we wish you welcome back to the committee. And could I say at this stage that in terms of those that have left, Councillor Nicholl and Councillor Goldie, I would just like to give them thanks from everybody for their contributions during the period that they've been there. So, good morning. This is Falkirk Council Planning Committee. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act, the convener has directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. In accordance with Section 58 of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973, the public are excluded from this meeting, as it is likely if members of the public were present, there would be a real and substantial risk to public health due to infection or contamination with coronavirus. This meeting will be live streamed via the council website. So, first of all, first part is the apologies. I'll go to Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, any apologies?
Thank you, Provost. We have apologies submitted by Councillor Alexander and also Councillor McHugh. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to item 2, which is declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interests they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? None intimated. Fine, thank you very much for that. Takes us to item 3, which is the minute of meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 17th of November 2021. It's pages 3 to 9 on your agenda papers. Have we any questions arising from that minute, or can we agree the minutes?
Agreed, Convener.
Agreed. Everybody agreed? Fine, thank you very much. That takes us to item 4 on the agenda this morning. Erection of outbuilding and hard standing at Garwold House, Fankerton, Denny, for Mr and Mrs Masterton. It's pages 10 to 35. Before we go into the item itself, I would like to bring forward our planning officer, Bernard Whittle, to give us an update. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Provost. You'll see from the report that this application was previously continued. The details are set out in paragraph 3 of the report. It was hoped that the matters detailed in the report would have been completed by the time we came to committee today. However, there are still some outstanding points around the Badger survey and land ownership that are still to be resolved. In those circumstances, we are recommending that this application be continued further and come back to a future meeting of the committee. Now, these issues have been discussed with the objector and the applicant's agent, neither of whom have raised any objection to the continuation of the application. So, as said, it's recommended to members that this application be continued and not considered today. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I'll formally move that we go for the continuation. Has everybody agreed? Is anybody otherwise minded? Councillor Bowes, you seconding?
Yeah.
Fine. Anybody otherwise minded? No. Okay, then the matter will be continued.
Councillor Kerr.
Yes. Councillor Kerr.
I'm not otherwise minded, but if these matters were still in debate before the report came forward, why did it just not continue before the report came? That's what I'm asking.
Right, well, Bernard, would you like to come in on that?
Yes, I can, Provost. Councillor Kerr, there has been ongoing discussions over the last sort of week or so in relation to this application. So it's in the light of additional information that's come forward very recently that's meant that we've needed to seek this continuation at this late time.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Convener.
No, that's good for clarification. Okay, then we're good to that. That takes us on to item 5 this morning on your agenda. Erection of 8 dwelling houses at land to the northeast of Braehead, 1 Main Street, Shield Hill, for David Angus Limited. It's pages 36 to 50 on your agenda, and the report is by our planning officer, Mr. Kevin Brown. Kevin, thank you.
Thank you, Provost. This detailed application proposes the construction of 8 dwelling houses on a windfall site at Main Street and Shield Hill. The site is currently used for agriculture, but is located within the settlement boundary of Shield Hill. The proposal includes the formation of individual driveway accesses onto the southern side of the B810, as well as a newly formed lay-by to serve a visitor parking area for 2 cars on that side of the road as well. The proposal has generated no objections from Consultees, the Shield Hill and California Community Council, and 5 letters of representation were also received during the officer assessment period. I should point out that since the report has been finalised, a further 2 representations have also been received. These additional representations raise general concerns relating to the principle of development, road safety, impact on local services and visual impact. The remaining points of representation are covered within paragraphs 5.1 and 6.1 of the report, and assessment of these is contained within paragraph 7b8 to 7b11 of the report. In assessing the proposal against the terms of the development plan, officers consider that the proposal accords with the development plan policy and associated guidance. In particular, it's worth drawing to the committee's attention the fact that the scale of this development proposed in this instance sits below the threshold for developer contributions as set out within supplementary guidance. Children's Services have also confirmed that they are not requesting any developer contributions for this application. In conclusion, Convener, or Provost, sorry, the officer recommendation for this item is for committee to grant planning permission subject to conditions outlined in this report. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for the summary, Mr. Brown. Going to open it up now for members. Councillor Hughes.
Yes, I just, it was just a couple of points in relation to the application. Although it is saying that the development accords with the development plan, but can I ask, is the site an allocated site within the development plan?
Mr. Brown, you want to come back on that? Or?
The site's not an allocated housing site within the local development plan. It's considered as a windfall housing opportunity site due to its location within the settlement boundary. That's the policy, which the primary policy assessment is against the windfall housing policy in that respect.
I wasn't, so basically it's an unallocated site.
Okay.
So with unallocated sites, obviously there are a number of conditions that are attached to unallocated sites. I know that, for example, I think it's SG 13 in terms of thresholds. Could you explain that just a wee bit for me?
Kevin.
Thresholds, if you bear with me a wee second, I'm just getting to the relevant policy. Are you meaning the thresholds for developer contributions towards open space?
No, what I'm thinking is that because the size of the development is below a certain threshold, would I be right in saying that that no contributions of any kind are expected?
That's correct, yes. The supplementary guidance sets a threshold for open space contributions, for instance, of 10 units. Anything below which, any sites below that threshold wouldn't seek developer contributions towards open space provision. The policies in reference to affordable housing also set thresholds which this site doesn't meet. And then in addition, As I said in the summary there, the education contribution thresholds haven't, well, the education children's services have confirmed that they don't see a capacity issue.
Yeah, that was
related to
the
this
point
site
one.
that would
Sorry,
generate
Kevin, I was sorry to interrupt you there.
So
I was just wanting to ask under page 39, essay 5, Children's Service has confirmed that there is available capacity and therefore request and no contribution requested. But if the site is below a certain threshold, does that mean that Children's Services can still ask for a contribution? Or what I'm trying to get at, if a site is below a certain threshold, it then falls below the expectation of contributions. So does that mean that Children's Services then, even although they thought a contribution might be required, in a sense, they actually wouldn't actually have the power to ask for a contribution? Sorry, convoluted question, sorry.
I think the ability would be there for the council to make a decision depending on the individual circumstances of the case. The guidance sets thresholds there, and it is guidance ultimately. If the education or children's services rather come back with significant concerns, it would be open to the council to take a view which would request a contribution if it could be justified. In this instance, the consultation response from Children's Services didn't identify capacity pressures which would generate a need for developer contributions for this site.
Yep. Thank you. I have another, if you don't mind, I've got another couple of questions.
Carry on.
Yourself, convener, would that be okay?
Carry on, sir.
What I was also interested in terms of the site, it's obviously adjacent to Main Street, Shield Hill, but it's not actually on Main Street, Shield Hill. Is this site part of a wider aspect? Because it says it was farmland, obviously, and is part of the site still part of other farms or other fields, if I put it that way?
I'm not sure of the exact ownership status of other farmland in the immediate vicinity of the site. I don't know if Bernard, if you could bring up the site photographs again. The application site is part of a wider or a larger current agricultural field. I think it's used for grazing generally.
Right.
So yes, it's part of a wider agricultural use, but the boundaries of this proposed site are defined, and there's no proposals within the local development plan or other applications or inquiries at the moment suggesting that it's part of a wider development proposal.
Right. My other question, because obviously it's part of farmland, would I be right in saying that it would be part of a working farm?
Farmland can change hands quite readily, to be honest. So I don't know of the current status of that, whether it's part of a current working farm. The characteristics of the site are that it appears to be used for grazing. In the most recent past, there are there's a feed storage circle on the site at the moment, for instance. It appears to indicate that it's been used for grazing most recently.
So it would technically be part of a farm, although that was my question. Could we have a part of a field basically within a village urban settlement and the rest of the field considered to be in the countryside?
Yes, that's exactly the scenario that we've got at the moment with this application.
Right. I was just trying to get clarification, that was all. And if it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm probably totally wrong, if a farmer wishes, for example, to build a house on his field, say for an agricultural worker, just as a scenario, in the past, would I be right in saying that farmers would have had to submit annual reports to the planning department as part of their business case? Just to let, because it would basically let the planning department know how the farm was going or how it was doing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the distinction there is that the majority of applications that the council receive on farmland are within the countryside as defined by the local development plan. What we've got here is an application site. Yes, it's on farmland, but it's within the urban limit, the settlement boundary as defined by the local development plan, and that requires it to be assessed against slightly different policies within the local development plan. So the section that you refer to there about the requirement in the past and on other sites for the applicants to provide details of the business operations of the site really goes to the heart of whether or not it can be justified against the countryside policy element assessment process, which requires us to be able to justify that a house is required in the countryside location in order to support the agricultural business in that location. On this site, it's different. As I say, the primary assessment is against the windfall housing policy, as opposed to, because it's not countryside, it's not assessed against the countryside policies, and that element isn't then required.
I think that was where my confusion came in, because what I was thinking was that if it was a working farm scenario, and farms had to submit business cases, what I thought was if it was still a working farm, in terms of selling of land, would it not still be part of a business case? Now, I'm not interested in what the confidential aspects of a business case. It was just really the principle. That was all.
It may well be part of a wider business case for the original landowner. It's not something that comes into the assessment of this application, however. And that's something that hasn't come up in the assessment process today, for instance.
Right. My final question at the moment was in terms of the road heading into Shield Hill. I noticed that in the report under 7B10, if I can just get the bit where I've under 7B10, the roads department. This might not be a question for you, Kevin. Sorry, it might be for the roads department. The scale of development proposed is not likely to result in a significant increase in traffic. I was wondering what the definition of significant was.
Have we got MD for roads here this morning? Could you maybe come in and, Russell, could you come in and answer that question for Councillor Hughes?
Significance a bit of a kind of subjective type thing, really. Bear in mind, this is 8 houses on a road that carries quite a significant volume of traffic. So it's not insignificant, but it's not a significant number of additional trips on that road, that B-class road.
Yeah, I noticed in the sorry, Russell, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I just noticed in the application that there was parking spaces for 24, and also probably parking spaces on the road. Was that not add a significant amount of traffic coming and access and egressing onto the road?
That's not our view.
I was just thinking,
the size of the property requires a number of off-street parking spaces based on the number of bedrooms, and that's how you get, it's 3 times 8, by the way. And
I'm just trying to clarify. That was all, and it was really where the site was in relation to heading into Shield Hill, and I was wondering if the site would cause any difficulties for traffic accessing, egressing into Shield Hill. That was in terms of the amount of extra traffic on the hill. That was all.
It's our view that's pretty insignificant in
Right.
this
Thank you, Russell.
particular road. You think about it, it's 8 houses in a settlement with several hundred, if not.
Well, it's
thousands.
actually on the outside of the village.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
within the urban settlement as
Yeah.
as defined and by the local development plan, but it's actually just on the outskirts of Shield Hill. Admittedly by a few yards. So anyway, thank you, Russell.
Okay.
Any further questions, Councillor Hughes?
Not at the moment, convener.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have Councillor Nimmo, Councillor Kerr and Councillor McCluckie. Councillor Nimmo.
Yep, thanks very much, Provost. Just a couple of points. Okay, it's a small development. It's only 8 properties. But I noticed from the paperwork that there's been no representations or anything made in relation to the health side of things. Why have the health board not contributed to this? And I would like to know, what is the nearest GP surgery for this new development? That's my first point.
Kevin, can you answer these questions?
I know there's been relatively recent discussion with the health authorities in reference to what level of communication we'll have and what thresholds. I don't know if Bernard can perhaps shed some light on what the thresholds are at the moment.
Thanks, Bernard.
Yeah, Provost, Councillor Nimmo. There have been discussions recently with the health board, and they have advised that I think it's more than sort of 20 units that they're likely to look at and take a view as whether contributions are required. So certainly for a development of this scale, they have indicated that it's not the sort of scale of development that they would seek contributions from.
Okay, what would be the current nearest GP surgery for this development?
I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't know what the nearest practice is in relation to this site.
I'm afraid I don't either. Sorry, Councillor Nimmo.
I'm just wondering if it would be Meadowbank and Pullman, or is there going to be one substantially nearer?
Well, we'll try and get that information for you.
Right, okay. Second point is in relation to children's services, and I note from the paperwork again that they're saying that there's no capacity issues. But okay, as I said before, it's only 8 properties, but if there's 2 kids from each of these properties going to the local primary school, I would imagine that would cause problems. And I'm just wondering what the capacity is for the local primary school at the moment.
Children's Services haven't given that level of detail in the response. The response for Shield Hill Primary School just straightforwardly said that the school currently has capacity to accommodate this development. And for St Andrews Roman Catholic Primary School, it's anticipated that St Andrews Primary School can accommodate the pupils from this proposed development. So, and it doesn't give any more detail than that, I'm afraid, but it's something that we can get more information on if necessary.
Right, just
Maybe
I'm a bit disappointed that that information isn't contained in the paperwork from Education Services, because it's an important factor to be taken into account.
Sorry, Provost, if I could comment on that, I would say that there's a lot of detailed work that's done by Children's Services into school capacities and forecasting changes, so that they're very quick to identify if there are concerns here and now or moving forward in future years in relation to development, and consider that contributions should be sought from development, then they would advise us of that.
Okay, Councillor Kerr, are you finished, Councillor Nimmo?
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost.
No problem. Councillor Kerr, then Councillor McCluckie.
Thanks, Provost. I wasn't wanting to jump in there when Councillor Nimmo was there, but Shield Hill has got 2, maybe 3 classrooms that they didn't use. So there is plenty of capacity at Shield Hill. Regarding the GP, it's either Bowman or the one at the bottom at Falkirk, wherever they go. I don't know what's the nearest, Alan. I don't know that's the nearest. Anyway, the questions that I've got, convener. When you had a look, I know the area very well because I lived in the village. And for me, I've thought for years why there's nobody there, because it's a gap site. The houses at one side and houses at the other side. So when Councillor Hughes says it's no in the village, it is in the village. Completely in the village. So in your view, Kevin, could that be classed as a gap site?
Kevin?
I think I haven't done the measurement in terms of what we would qualify as a gap site. I think it's slightly too large for a gap site, to be honest with you, in terms of the supplementary guidance. But really the gap site guidance really applies to sites within the countryside, and that's the reason that part of the guidance is there. It's a way of potentially justifying new development within the countryside. Again, this goes back to the fact that this one is within the settlement boundary, and therefore it needs to be assessed against the windfall housing development policy.
Okay.
So it's slightly different.
Thanks for that, Kevin. I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation, Provost. I'll formally move that we accept the recommendations.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Councillor McCluskey to come in next, but is you going to second that, Councillor Grant? I see your hand up.
Yeah, that's all, Provost. I'm not jumping in front of Councillor McCluskey. I was just jumping in to second Councillor Kerr's.
Okay, that's it, moved and seconded to go with the officer's recommendation. Councillor McCluskey.
Right, thanks, convener, for letting me in. I was going to second this, but obviously Councillor Grant has made me to it. In answer to some of the other councillors' questions, it was only a few years ago they were talking about one of the budget proposals. We were talking about closing California School because Shield Hall School could take them, the 100 pupils, because and that answers is there space at the school, and that's why education's come back and says there's no a capacity issue, because there isn't a capacity issue at Shield Hill School. And as I say, education gets asked the question, and as I say, so officers, if there's a problem, identify it. Legislation and planning says we can only ask for contributions to education if we prove there's a capacity issues, and that means our officers are, justify that there's issues, and obviously officers have stayed. There's no here. Clearly, it is within the boundary of the village. There is only one household objecting, and a member of the community council to the site. It's clearly windfall housing, as the report states. The only concern I've got was in relation to and it wasn't to thing me, it was to loss of open space. Well, I know that it's no used as the public land. However, it just seems strange to me that I'm minding an application in Valor Road for one house where we were transferring more ground to the site than what the person was going to use for a house, but we were looking for contribution for pass, and that was only one house. So it seems strange to me that 8 houses we kind of get nothing for a play provision, because that is one aspect of the village that sadly is lacking, is play provision. So I ask a question on that maybe for officers, but the principle of the development to me is, meets the conditions planning. So I've no problem in supporting it, but the only question is on relation to some sort of contribution because of the 8 houses and the need for open space contribution in that area. So I'm happy to take the officer's response, whatever it is.
Hey, thanks. Thanks, Councillor McCluskey. I know that Councillor Murtagh is waiting, but we'll go back to Kevin, I think you've already reiterated the situation regarding coming back with any money for open space so we just maybe want to clarify it again for Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, the situation that I think Councillor McCluskey is alluding to is compensatory payment element.
Yeah.
That's perhaps slightly different. So this application site falls below the thresholds for straightforward developer contributions towards the provision of new open space or improvement of other open space within the area at the moment. There does, with any application which includes loss of open space, require to be a judgment made, an assessment made about the value of that open space which is proposed to be lost, how it's used currently, and whether or not things like recreational value will be adversely affected. So the site that Councillor McCluskey refers to, I think I know the site in Villore Road that you're referring to there, Councillor. That may well have a slightly different characteristics, in that it was part of an open green space used for public access recreation purposes, and it has that intrinsic value associated with that. This site's slightly different in that it is used as agriculture. It's enclosed field. There's a visual amenity value perhaps, but there's no recreational value there, and therefore the compensatory payment element doesn't apply to this proposal. I hope that clarifies that there's the slight difference between the two.
You have professionally and fully answered the point, and you know, I thank you for that, and it clears it in my mind as well. And thanks very much for that, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for that. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Provost. And I think, you know, to kind of go back to Kevin on that, is that open space, I mean, and green spaces, you know, are really important within our communities, and it's really important that as a planning committee we do understand the basis of the definitions, and you know why, for example, if this is not being a site allocated within the local development plan and it's a windfall site because it wasn't expected to be assessed for housing, then you know, yes, if we're saying that the threshold, it doesn't meet the threshold because it's 8 houses, I think what our communities quite often see is, well, if you have a proposal for 8 houses on one windfall site, 9 on another, 6 on another, 7 on another, then collectively they do, but there's no obligation then for developers to make a contribution, and therefore the loss to the communities of overall amenity and open space is compounded. And that's, you know, perhaps a failure of the planning system and of planning policy in terms of how we can assess that, not having got planning officers, but in general the system of how we can look at things. But it's still something that I think that as elected members on this committee, we kind of have to explore and try to understand so that we are giving it proper scrutiny for our communities. You mentioned, I mean, when I was first looking at this and thinking, okay, where is this in relation to within the village? And I know there's a kind of certain dubiety that, you know, whether it appears to be, you know, it's too big for a gap site, as you said, in terms of measurement. It's not been measured as that. It's measured as a kind of windfall site within the urban definition limits, but what seems, you know, slightly removed from the main body, although you've got the houses on the other side, or, you know, and there's that kind of there is it's a large gap, I should say, as a kind of lay person's description. Although it's not, you're saying in terms of the assessment of loss of amenity or loss of something for recreational use for the community, I think that potentially that visual amenity and that health and well-being amenity that perhaps isn't necessarily quite caught up in the kind of way that we look at policy, but from a community point of view, I think they do value very much the green spaces, regardless of whether they're particularly using them or not. And it's, you know, if there's a general dearth of that in the area, I know that, you know, Shield Hill, and I'm sure the local councillors will tell me, is very much blessed with the surroundings of the countryside, but in terms of all our green spaces are precious, and that's why we do protect them. That's why, although you're saying it's not assessed as housing in the countryside, we are looking at it from a green space point of view. My question in general terms, though, although I totally respect the opinion given by Children's Services, is maybe for Mr. Henderson, in that we've had in the past, although if a school is saying, right, we've got capacity and clearly there is, demonstrable capacity in the primary school, one, in terms of the high school, is that the same? But also, I recall from, for example, Kinnaird and other places that if there is other planning applications which are going through a process or potentially have been given permission or potentially sitting there with large numbers which would attract contribution, that would potentially be a material consideration. So I don't know whether the planners could answer whether there are any other applications which would correspond in that area, and maybe whether legal could clarify if that is the case, whether there's any material considerations we would need to maybe look at in that respect.
Okay, we'll go to you first, Kevin. Are you aware of any other developments coming forward for that area? And then we'll go to Mr. Henderson regarding the legal aspect. Kevin?
I hope you don't mind, Provost. I might ask Bernard to clarify that. Bernard's got a better overview of the whole area as opposed to myself, I'm afraid.
Fine, thank you. Bernard?
Yeah, I suppose I'd refer you, Councillor, to the local development plan and the sites that are indicated in there that are allocated for housing development. So Children's Services have carried out an assessment of capacity needs, which will be based on assessment of what sites are proposed to come forward through the development plan. But they will also monitor applications as they come through as well. So what I was saying before in response to the question from Councillor Nimmo was that they do have a firm handle on these issues, what the school capacities are, where there are pressures, is there a requirement for contributions to be sought from development. So there's a degree of forecasting done at it as well. So certainly from my point of view, if in this case Children's Services have looked at it and looked at the capacity of this site as proposed, they will have also considered the bigger picture of what's allocated through the development plan and what's been coming forward in the way of approvals that have been granted, and taken a view as to whether contributions would have been required in this instance. From what we've heard there, obviously their view is that they don't feel that this does trigger the need for any compensatory payments to be made, given the scale, but it will be in recognition of everything else that is potentially in the pipeline. Okay, thank you. Councillor Murtagh, could you maybe just reiterate your question to Mr. Henderson, who's sitting beside me here?
Sure. I mean, I suppose if that's the case, I suppose Mr. Henderson doesn't necessarily need to give an answer, but my concern is that, as we've experienced in this committee, once we've made a decision, it can be very difficult if circumstances change. We cannot then go back and ask for a contribution. And what has happened in the past in other areas is that simultaneously a situation has occurred where we can no longer go back to a developer, but the capacity issues because of the compounding development have changed. And obviously Kinnaird is one of those examples where we have to be I think we have to have those kind of answers on record in the committee when we make these decisions, so that our communities can see that has been fully considered. So I'm grateful for the answer, but I think it was important to explore, because I think particularly and I know that in general the whole area in the Braes and Upper Braes, there's been a lot of development, particularly with pressures then that are looked at on towards the high school, maybe not specifically in that area, but I think that it's important that we are not just looking at the primary schools as well, that we're looking at the high schools too and the forecast capacity there. As I mentioned also in my own word with Kinnaird and Larbert High, that's one of the main issues as well. It's not necessarily just about the local primary school having capacity as well. I realise it's only 8 houses, but at the same time it can be compounded as we go on. Thanks, Provost.
No, it's a very good point. I was listening to the same page as yourself in relation to the general discussions we had in relation to Kinnaird and the problems associated with legality and trying to get more money out of them at that particular stage. Ian, would you like to come in and just clarify?
Thank you, Provost. And I think in all fairness, I was probably just going to say much the same as Mr. Whittle just narrated, but taking things just a little bit further. I think it's probably worth pointing out to the committee members that things like contributions would be covered by a Section 75 planning obligation. There is a Scottish Government circular in relation to planning obligations, which sets out a number of tests that have to be satisfied. So the tests are that a condition or an obligation under a Section 75 agreement, including contributions, has to be necessary to make the proposed development acceptable in planning terms. It must serve a planning purpose, and where it is possible to identify infrastructure provision requirements in advance, should relate to the development plan. It should relate to the proposed development. It should fairly and reasonably relate in scale and kind to the proposed development and be reasonable in all other respects. The reason I raise all of that is there's also the ability, even if a Section 75 obligation is entered into, for an applicant to challenge and seek a modification of that. And if that ended up with the Scottish ministers, they would be looking at these tests quite carefully to make sure that they're met. So, Provost, I think with that said, I would just hand back to you if that answers the question. Thank you.
Provost, may I just ask sort of a quick supplementary?
Yes.
Because it's maybe there's maybe an element slightly omitted from that my understanding, so just to clarify on the point of principle, my understanding is, however, that if, for example, regardless of whether a Section 75 was asked for, that it could be a material planning consideration that, for example, if there was a site where the school, and I don't know the school well, but if the school didn't have, for example, any other space to accommodate modular classrooms or be expanded, and that obviously a site such as 8 houses or maybe even 100 houses wouldn't mean a new school, that would be a material consideration in itself for members to consider that the whole application was not therefore appropriate. So I think, it's not that you would be asking for a Section 75 and trying to justify a Section 75. Members could, I understand it from previous legal advice you've given, Mr. Henderson, take a view that the application was not suitable, basically just on that point, or that material consideration was heavily weighted towards that. Is that the case?
Ian?
Thank you, Provost, and thanks, Councillor Murtagh. Yes, essentially, the range of what can be material considerations is quite broad. It's essentially anything that's concerned with the use and development of land. What I would say is that if the committee was wanting to take a decision on that basis, it would want to have evidence before it and reasonable grounds for taking that view. And I say that because if it didn't have these reasonable grounds, there would be a likelihood that on appeal, the reporter would look quite carefully at the reasoning behind the council's decision. Thank you, Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks. Your advice is always very valuable, Mr. Henderson. It's just good to clarify it.
Okay, thank you for your input. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Provost. I would get to that unmute button eventually. A couple of things. One's more technical, and I get what John and Laura have been talking about. And maybe Ian can. I seem to remember seeing something, Ian, that there is something where occasionally you can get voluntary contributions by developers. It's a Section 60 something. I want to say 9, I think, if I remember right, but I don't remember the exact number of it. Where you can sometimes get that, and I don't know if that can be sought post granting or if it's something we could speak to the developer about. And I'm particularly thinking on the lines what John has spoke about already, where he was talking about play, about play area, and if that is important in this area. I don't know if the developer would be, I know it'd be voluntary, but I don't know if it'd be worth pursuing it or having a look at that. On the other side, my more technical question, sorry Russell, this is coming to you. And this is going back from, and I'm looking at the drawing that's here, which shows where the road comes down, and particularly to the west where it turns left. And the rules might be different for a direct access driveway as opposed to, and I'm thinking of the site at Torwood, which I'm sure the Provost will remember, where we refused because of the lack of visibility to the access to the site point. Now, because that's a site point, that might be different and might have heavier traffic. Can Russell confirm if it's different going on straight onto a domestic driveway as opposed to coming into a site, because it doesn't look as if it's just looking at the drawing there, it doesn't look as if it's 100 metres to the new development.
Russell, would you like to come in here? Thank you, sir.
Aye. I mean, and our guys have looked at this site and looked at the driveways, and they're satisfied there's adequate visibility for the driveways. If you look at the problem out at Torwood was actually the vertical alignment rather than the horizontal geometry. If you look at here, you know, the bend that Councillor Bowes mentions slightly to the west is actually increases, helps with visibility rather than hinders, if you follow me. If the development had been on the other side of the road, might have been a bit of an issue. So I can't really say very much more than that.
That's fine, Russell. I just wanted to explore that, because as I say, I knew it was something we had problems with in the past. Ian, can you explain the voluntary contribution that sometimes developers will do? Because I have seen some of them in the past.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes, with your leave, Provost. Yes, it's called a unilateral planning obligation, and it's sometimes put into place by a developer to try and get over a hurdle to the grant of planning permission. So it would be something that we would want to know was in place before taking decisions, because once a decision's been taken, perhaps if a decision was taken to grant, there's no guarantee that a developer would provide any sums of money, and there'd be no route to the council to be able to seek that. So that would potentially be the route. The only position at the moment is that you would probably require to continue this matter today for discussions to take place with the applicant and see if they might be minded to enter into some sort of obligation. But again, I know it sounds slightly tricky and technical, but you could have a position where it's agreed to be entered into in a planning agreement, and later on the applicant still seeks a modification of that planning obligation. And that would then be considered under the tests that I narrated earlier. Does that help to answer the question, Councillor Bowes?
It does. In that case, then I'm in the hands of the proposer and the seconder if they want to continue, to see if that can be explored.
Could you maybe just clarify, Councillor Bowes, what you want to explore? Do you want to explore the possibility of this applicant coming forward with contributions?
A voluntary contribution.
Right. Okay.
It's from basically the contribution of Councillor McCluckie, and he did talk about there was concern for play areas in Shield Hill. I don't know it that well, so I'm literally putting myself in the hands of the proposer and the seconder.
Okay, Councillor McCluckie, you got a question that you want to ask, because we know you've already spoken, but you get any other further questions?
Convener, the question I've got in this relating, it's been very beneficial to this. We've got to mind that we're on YouTube now, and people out there like to hear that we're doing full scrutiny and everything. Before I go and respond to, obviously, Councillor Bowes, obviously Alan said earlier about the issue with health contributions, which we brought into the local plan when things come into the local plan to be looked at now. But could officers, I mean, I know the answers, but you know, if it's for the public out there, can we have a duty to ask the health service, same as other consultee bodies, when we put planning applications in. But can you tell us, obviously, roughly what percentage of responses we get from the health body? Because we do know that even some of the major developments that we have passed, and nearly a year later, they still haven't come back with a response, despite numerous letters from council and the developers. So even though we've maybe agreed a policy, because we're still waiting on some sort of response from the health board, developments aren't signed and concluded. So, but I do know that we ask on many occasions, but I think it's a few times we just get, it's only rare that we get a response. So could Bernard answer that question, please?
Well, before I bring Bernard in, I would just like to reiterate exactly what you're saying, Councillor McCluckie, that we've had numerous applications that have come forward and they've been held back continuously because we've never ever had any responses to the health board. And I think that we need to actually look at that more seriously to ensure that they come back as soon as, because it's not only affecting communities, it's not affecting applications, but it's affecting this council because of the fact that we've got officers that continually trying to finalise applications but can't do it because of the fact is that they're waiting in this consultee. And I think there should be something put in place to ensure there's a timescale to ensure that the health board come back as soon as for the benefit of everybody. Bernard, would you like to come in on that?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor McCluckie. I can confirm that there is work ongoing at the moment with the health board in relation to this issue. Yes, we have had a number of cases where we have sought responses from the health board on applications, and it is taking a while to get responses back. Now that's recognised, and with our policy colleagues in the planning environment team, we are working to try and resolve that through discussion with the health board to try and seek some improvements. And obviously that's a lot around the consideration of what the impacts of new developments or additional developments are on the health board. You appreciate, obviously, through the last couple of years, you know, they've had a number of changes to working processes and how they provide services as well. So there's a bigger issue there in terms of what the health board's accommodation needs are and how they, moving forward, will be providing services. And that all feeds in to that conversation with planning about identifying what the impacts of developments are and how those impacts can be mitigated. So certainly there is a conversation that is ongoing, and we are keen with policy colleagues to get some resolution to that. Moving forward, you're perhaps aware that in terms of Scottish national policy, there's a consultation ongoing at the moment on NPF4, National Planning Framework 4, and this is also one of the issues that's coming up through that wider policy consultation, the whole issue about health, assessment of health and how that relates to the consideration of planning applications. So sorry, that's a bit of a round and about answer. In short, yes, there is an issue there, and we're aware of it, and we're seeking some resolution to it. In relation to this application, what I can say is on the basis of the discussions we've had so far with the health board, the scale of development that's being proposed here is well below the thresholds that the health board have advised they would seek contributions on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bernard, just wondering if you could keep members updated, especially this committee, because the fact is that the health board, it's not just in the past year or 2 years because of the COVID, we're talking about before that, they were very reluctant to come back quickly with any information that we required, and it's not good for anybody. Councillor Blackwood.
Thanks, Convener. Just on Councillor Bow's suggestion of a continuation with a view to seeking voluntary contributions from the developer, I would imagine the developer is looking in on this and he's seen very little dissent from the planning committee to refuse his application. What's our situation if we go to his developer and he says, no, he's not going to give, are we going to come back and refuse it? I think it'd be very embarrassing.
It's a good point. I'll go back to maybe Mr Henderson on this one. Mr Henderson, you heard Councillor Blackwood, and I totally agree with what he's saying there.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Councillor Blackwood. It would obviously be for the committee to exercise their planning judgment if a matter was to come back. I think perhaps a difficulty would be that if you were refusing it on the basis of a lack of contributions, if there wasn't good grounds for such refusal, you might be exposed to potential appeal to the Scottish ministers.
Provost, can I just come in? I wasn't looking at an adversarial discussion with them. As I say, that's why I kept said the word voluntary. And to say it was just following on from Councillor McClucky's statement. I'm not looking for an adversarial thing here.
Okay, thank you for your clarification. You got a question, Councillor Nimmo?
Just a quick point on the back of Councillor McClucky's contribution there, Provost. I raised the issue of the health board situation already when I spoke earlier on. Now, if these properties are going to be zoned with the Meadowbank Health Centre in Pullman, there's already serious capacity issues within this practice. And I'm not convinced that the practice would be able to take any further patients. So, irrespective of the size of the development, I would have expected the health board to make some sort of comment in relation to the current situation, and there's nothing at all.
I think Councillor Nimmo, you're 100% right, but I think you realise the frustration that not only members of this committee have, but also the officers who diligently contact the health board when they're finalising reports coming here to ensure that we've got as much information as possible. It's out with everybody's control, bar the health board. And what I'm saying is that we need, as a local authority, to try and impose the importance of the information coming back, because it's costing the council money, and it's costing applicants money, it's costing communities maybe facilities. And at the end of the day, as Mr. Whittle has said, is that they're in talks at the moment with the health board, and I'm hoping that they're going to be serious talks, open and frank, and get them to come back as soon as. Anyway, I'm just going to clarify where we are. We have a motion moved and seconded to agree the recommendations contained within the report. Is there anybody otherwise minded at this time? Are we agreeing?
Convener, I'd be more happy with a continuation in relation to this so we can get the further details that was requested.
The further details for the health board, are you saying?
Yep, I think it's important that we get some sort of information from them regarding capacity levels. I mean, Meadowbank Health Centre's in my ward, and the number of complaints I get on a daily basis from constituents about the fact that they can't get appointments, there's serious concerns, obviously, regarding this.
Okay, so you're moving an amendment to that then, to the notice of motion. Have we got a seconder? No seconder. So we agreed to the notice of motion to agree the recommendations contained within the report.
Councillor McClucky has his hand up.
McClucky's got his hand up.
What are you saying, Councillor McClucky?
Convener, I'm only going to say a response, and I'm not supporting obviously Alan in this one.
Well, excuse me, Councillor.
I'm aware. I'm aware.
Hold on
I'm
a
aware
minute.
that
Councillor
you can
McClucky,
wait years in
hold on a
response.
minute. Councillor McClucky, hold on a minute. We're at a stage where we had an amendment came forward for Councillor Nimmo. You had your hand up. Are you seconding the amendment?
No.
No, that's fine. Okay, there's nobody seconding the amendment, so we're agreeing to the recommendation contained within the report.
Agreed.
We've agreed to that.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to be a wee bit sharp there, Councillor McClucky, but I think, Bernard, I think you'll take the views of this committee on board. And the fact is that it's not a good position that we're in, because of the fact is that I know that there's other applications that have come forward to this council, and they're still waiting on reports coming back for the health board, and it's time that something was done. Okay, that takes us to item 6 on your agenda this morning. Construction of domestic garage retrospective at 30 Allen Crescent, Donopace, Denny, for Mr. Jason Secker. It's pages 51 to 67, and the report is by our planning officer, Mr. John Cooney. Thank you, Mr. Cooney.
Thank you, Provost. And I'll just get Bernard to share the site photographs, if that's possible, please.
If you can just bear with me, it's going to take a moment to get those loaded up.
That's no problem. So this application at 30 Allen Crescent in Donopace in Denny has been called in by Councillor McHugh. The proposal seeks retrospective permission for a single-storey domestic garage outbuilding in the southwest corner of the application site. This outbuilding is intended for personal use associated with the applicant's hobby of stock car racing and is not intended for commercial use. The structure was built in mid-2020 and brought to officers' attention in a planning enforcement complaint, after which this application was submitted. I should also mention that since the publication of the agenda for this committee, minor discrepancies were identified in the submitted drawings and have been updated in the interest of accuracy and made public on the council website on January 12th. Therefore, in the event of approval today, the updated drawings would be cited on the decision notice, our online reference numbers 01A, 02B for Bravo, 03 and 04, and obviously that would be the case if there's a refusal decision as well. In terms of Consultees, the council's flooding officer did object to the application on the grounds of flood risk to other properties caused by the building of the garage within the functional floodplain of the Avon Burn. The council's environmental protection unit is separately undertaking an investigation of air quality and noise at this property. Objections from 6 persons were received during the course of the application, and a petition signed by 19 persons from 12 addresses was also received. The most important matters raised within these objections were as follows: that the size and use of the garage is inappropriate in this residential area, concern at a commercial business operating from the site either now or in the future, noise and disturbance to neighbouring residents, and traffic and parking issues along Allen Crescent. A late objection which reiterated the previous concerns raised was received by Councillor McHugh in the past few days and was brought to the attention of officers. In terms of the officer assessment, we considered that the size and footprint of the garage relate well to the existing large plot, and in the event of approval, planning condition would require that the external walls, which you can see are exposed concrete blocks, would be clad in render within 6 months of that decision, therefore improving the structure's appearance. In terms of the use of the garage, the application is for domestic use associated with a hobby, and there is no evidence before officers to suggest that a commercial use is operating from the existing garage. A separate planning application may be required in the event that the applicant or any future occupier wishes to change the use of the garage, were the application to be approved today. That application will be subject to neighbour notification and assessment against the relevant development plan policies and material considerations. Turning to the concern of the flood officer, this is acknowledged. However, having considered Scottish planning policy in light of the size and domestic nature of the proposed garage outbuilding, officers have concluded that the proposal would not have a significant effect on the storage capacity of the functional floodplain, and that the resulting impact in local flood risk would not be significant. It is acknowledged that inappropriate parking has recently been observed on open green space out with the applicant's control to the north of this site, which is held on the account of the council's housing services. This matter has been brought to the attention of that service, and they are continuing to monitor the situation. In addition, an investigation is currently underway by the Environmental Protection Unit, following reports of noise and air quality issues emanating from the application site. And I understand an officer from that service has spoken with the applicant. Whilst officers are sympathetic to such concerns from local residents, these matters are considered to be separate to the assessment of this planning application, which is for a domestic outbuilding. The structure itself is adequately set back from the street to not compromise parking capacity on site, and it is more appropriate to progress any necessary enforcement as regards noise and air quality with domestic outbuildings under separate environmental health legislation rather than planning legislation. An officer from the Environmental Protection Unit is in attendance today should members require an update regarding their investigation. In summary, officers considered that in this instance, the proposed retrospective domestic garage outbuilding would accord with local development plan policies subject to planning conditions, and that the matters raised in public representations do not constitute sufficient grounds for refusal of this application, and the application is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooney, for your fulsome report. Open it up to members. Councillor Blackwood.
I'm not familiar. I'm obviously familiar with the area, but I'm not familiar with this house or the outbuilding, and I don't know if it'd be worthwhile a site visit to have a look at it. Certainly concerned about the flood management and what was the other one that's objecting to the environmental.
Site visit. We'll just touch to Mr. Henderson at the moment, because I would agree with you, Councillor Blackwood. Mr. Henderson, site visit.
Thank you, Provost. It is available for the committee to conduct and hold a site visit. As matters sit on the back of the pandemic, we wouldn't have a site visit that would include a hearing session, but it's certainly available for a site visit to be convened to allow members to view the physical characteristics of the site, and that would be supported by officers.
I'm quite happy to second Councillor Blackwood's site visit. Is there anybody otherwise minded at this stage? Are happy to agree to a site visit be organised by our officers? Are we agreed? Okay, thank you very much. Now that brings us to the end of this morning's meeting. Thank you very much. But can I say at this stage that if everybody is happy, we're going to ask the new Director of Police to send a very hard and fast correspondence to the Health Board in relation to the problems that we have with them responding. Is everybody happy with that? Fine.
I think we all will be.
Councillor
Problem
Murtagh.
for years.
Yeah, Councillor Murtagh.
I'm happy that we send a letter and we ask the Director of Police to do so. However, I just want to know, and obviously as you say the public are watching, this problem has been going on for a long time. I can fully understand it at this time, and I'm sure we all do, the pressures on the Health Board to correspond and deal with it, and that is in no way indicative of the fact that the Health Board have many other pressing matters. It's just that this is a serious matter and it does predate the pandemic, but I think it'd be really remiss of us not to ask the Director of Police to include that within the tone of his letter, that this is, we understand the unprecedented situation that they are in responding to consultations and discussions, but obviously reflecting the seriousness of the matter.
Yes, a very good point, but I'm quite sure he's professional enough to realise that. Okay, we're agreed to that, and just to let you know that the PDH, because of the illness of the convener, Councillor Alexander, I'll be convening the PDH this evening and look forward to seeing you at 6 o'clock. Other than that, thanks to officers and members. Thank you very much.